And welcome back, fourth and long fans. It is your AFL correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here with another episode going across the states, finding U.S. or non-American born footy fans from all 18 clubs. And today I have Mr. Rick Shaibani. Rick, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, Donnie. Morning.
Good morning. We're having to record this early in the morning. It's one of the few times that Rick can do it, which I don't mind. He's a busy man. So I got to ask Rick, outside of footy, what's your story besides footy?
Well, born and raised in small town Virginia. Always grew up loving sport. Um, American mom, British dad. Um, you know, Grew up enjoying basketball, football. Again, grew up in a small town. Didn't have a ton of opportunities to play sport. At least not as much as I would have liked. I did a handful of things like martial arts or rec basketball, and enjoyed those quite a bit. Dabbled in some music as well. Went off to college in New Mexico, at New Mexico State University. Finished up there in 2015. Got an internship in the Phoenix area right out of college, which is originally where I picked up footy in the Phoenix metro area. I played a little bit of rugby union in college. Didn't really have a chance to commit to it full time either before or after, just with school, and then afterwards just with life happening. So that kind of got put on the back burner for a while, but then I discovered footy and just really fell in love with it. Actually, kind of previewing what we're going to be talking about, picked GWS kind of early on to barrack for, primarily just because they back then they were still pretty terrible. This is like 2015, but people were saying like, oh, they've got the right ingredients for success. They've got a good culture, even though of course Sydney's a rugby town. So eventually, I moved out to LA, August of 2016. Got involved with the LA Dragons, and originally moved out here for my career in the film industry. And in 2019, last year, as you well know, Donnie, I had a chance to spend the year in Australia, in Melbourne, playing local footy, which was an incredible experience, obviously. Playing for Caroline Springs in the WRFL, which was an unforgettable experience, and obviously coming back into a COVID world has been challenging for me, as it's been for all of us. But it's still great to be able to do stuff like this, to chat about footy, and whether it's US AFL, AFL, whatever it is, it's fun, and I reckon it gives us all a good distraction. We can't play footy right now, but we can definitely talk about it and enjoy the passion that everyone brings to being a big fan of this game.
Mm-hmm. So you found it. So you found footy in Phoenix, Arizona. Like, how specifically did you find it? Was it like on a YouTube page? Did you like come across it in a park? I mean, how was your finding of the game?
That is a very funny story. Well, firstly, unlike many Americans, I knew it wasn't rugby.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was vaguely aware of, the Aussie punter phenomenon in gridiron. The fact that, you have all these huge, big-legged Aussie guys coming over, playing American football and becoming really good punters. And I had a very vague notion of that. Again, I had played rugby, so I wasn't afraid of contact. It was just a question of finding, like I said, growing up, I never really had a niche sport that I could kind of sink my teeth into. And I was suggested footy by a good friend of mine, Alex, who I played rugby with. And the rugby side I was training with at the time was very veteran, very experienced. There really wasn't that many opportunities for a newcomer to kind of break into the side and play consistently. So basically, I was getting a little frustrated with it, and Alex tells me, "Hey, have you ever heard of Aussie rules football?" And this is an American guy, for the record. And I was just like, "No, I haven't." He's like, "Oh, well, when I was 10 years younger, I played, and you you should give it a go. It's really fun, fast paced. You're reasonably athletic. You should give it a crack. And I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll check it out. And as fate would have it, a week later, this is September in Phoenix. I'm at a bar with a friend at 1 in the morning in September, and the only thing on TV that's sports related is, you guessed it, the AFL finals. And of course, I'm like, what the hell is this? And I'm like, oh, this must be that Aussie football thing that Alex was telling me about. And no, yeah. And then I, found a few YouTube videos, started figuring out the rules from there. And I think, like many Americans who first stumble upon footy, it's like the joke is, Aussie rules? What rules? This game is so chaotic.
Mhm.
But of course, as anyone who's actually played it for a significant amount of time, like, it's an incredibly cerebral sport, and there's so many little details and little nuances you can miss out on if you're not super in touch with how the game's played. So that was kind of how it all started for me.
Awesome. So, do you think you transitioned from rugby? Or do you think your transition from rugby to footy was a little bit easier because you have more of a body type to fit Aussie rules more than rugby?
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I really was not that great at rugby. My dad played religiously for years. Of course, being a Brit, it's in his DNA.
Hmm.
But I mean, I definitely gravitated towards footy. I guess I could kind of see that it required more finesse, if you will, or just kind of. There's more players. There's a bigger field. There's a lot more um, different skills that are required. Obviously, uh, the gameplay methods are very different, and I think it was just kind of like the perfect marriage of skill and athleticism. And I think once I was able to get in shape, it was really rewarding. And I moved out to LA. I mean, at the time, the Arizona Hawks were kind of rebuilding the team from scratch. There was a solid women's team. They still do have a solid women's team. But I mean, like, most of the guys had, like, moved away or retired, and so yeah, it was. And this is Phoenix, like, you're training at 8 a.m. on a Sunday, and it's already 95 Fahrenheit. So there were a lot of challenges, but I was lucky to learn from a lot of really talented players. Ryan Ludo and his brothers, or Candy Candelaria. Candy was actually the first guy I ever had a kick with. And yeah, so, like, there was a really strong nucleus of talent there, and there still is. So that definitely stood me in good stead. In the few months I trained with them before I moved out to LA and got involved with the Dragons. In fact, the first email I sent after I moved to LA was to Jabba, who's the president of the Dragons, and I was just like, hey, what time do you guys train? I'd love to come down. And I first hung out with them when we were watching the footy at a bar in West Hollywood, if I remember correctly. So yeah, that was really fun, and kind of the beginning of a really amazing experience so far with the LA Dragons.
Yeah, such a cool story, and you have one of the more unique ones because of the fact you had the opportunity to go play in Australia, which I think not everybody has that ability to do. But okay, so you kind of already discussed it. You're a huge you're a GWS fan, so I gotta ask, as a GWS fan, it's a relatively new team. How would you kind of describe to people your fandom of the club? Are you a get up in the early morning hours to watch the games? Or you kind of or you can watch them whenever but you're going to watch the game, so on and so forth?
Yeah, well, as most people know already, the Watch AFL app and website is a phenomenal tool. It's literally designed for anybody. Mostly Aussie expats who live abroad outside of the homeland, and need to have access um, to watch the footy. And so yeah, like, obviously it's great to either watch games live if you're able to stay up that late, or get up that early. Obviously, I'm on the West Coast, so slightly, like slightly better. Most of the games are on at like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. my time. Of course, Melbourne is about 18 hours ahead of the West Coast, so not as brutal as, where you guys are at in
Mm-hmm.
Iowa, or East Coast footy fans. Like that's genuinely rough. I do not envy you guys, but no, yeah. With GWS, it's kind of funny because obviously, they get a lot of criticism. Oh, plastic club, manufactured club. But I mean, it's something where it's like the rate of growth that they've had and the ability, not just through their recent success on the footy oval, but just in terms of their strategy for, again, building a club in an area that's been so hostile historically to AFL. I mean, I have a few Sydney Sider teammates in LA, and they tell me stories like, mate, when I was 15, 16, 17, footy didn't exist in schools. It was
Mm-hmm.
rugby and only rugby. One of them actually didn't even pick up AFL till he moved to Canberra as an adult. And yeah, like that's such a weird dichotomy that I think a lot of Americans don't really get in terms of like the divide between
Mm-hmm.
Queensland, New South Wales, or the rugby states.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else basically plays footy. It's roughly a half and half split population-wise in Australia. And of course, Western Sydney specifically, it's a very diverse area. There's a lot of Polynesians, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, Polynesians have no short track record of success in rugby. So, but they've done a really good job in terms of marketing AFL in schools, doing AusKick clinics in the community. Of course, they've got the Giants Academy, just like the Swans have their own academy. The growth really has been tremendous. I mean, it's not that different to the Melbourne Storm. The Melbourne Storm are a rugby league team that, against all odds, have won multiple flags in the NRL in Melbourne. They're the only NRL team anywhere outside of, Queensland, New South Wales, Canberra, and New Zealand. So, I mean, the Giants definitely haven't gotten over that hump. Obviously, there was the really rough grand final loss to Richmond this past year. We didn't make finals. I reckon, a lot of COVID issues, injury issues, just lack of consistency. It was definitely not a great season. And, but I think there's definitely a case to be made that there's still the ingredients there for a big run. I think more so than a lot of other clubs, since they're the youngest club, it was really hard for the Giants to adapt to kind of being the hunted instead of the hunter, you might say. Because, that's difficult for a lot of clubs. I mean, apart from Richmond, there are so many other teams that are in that good but not great category. It's been, even for clubs that are really, really consistent, like Collingwood or West Coast, they're definitely not immune to those types of challenges. So I think the Giants definitely can make a comeback. Everyone's going to point to losing Jeremy Cameron or Zach Williams or guys like that. And those players were huge to the growth of the club. But I think there's a lot of talent that's been unearthed in recent years. I've been really excited to see guys like Jake Riccardi, like seeing him go off and kick bags earlier this year was a treat. And just reading his story was incredible because it was like, this kid came from Werribee. Werribee, for those who don't know, is one of the best VFL clubs. And every single Victorian team had passed on this kid. I mean, the guy's like 6'5", prototypical key forward, center half forward type. And he's just a phenomenal player. And everyone missed out on him. And GWS just randomly picked him up off the scrap heap, kind of, as a mature-aged rookie, if I remember correctly. So having guys like that is really big. And again, you can't say enough about what the GWS Academy is doing. There have been a bunch of really solid players who've been able to come through that program and in a very cool twist, a lot of them are from first generation Australian or immigrant backgrounds or indigenous backgrounds, guys who may or may not typically get a chance to play high level AFL footy. So I think in terms of overall club culture, there's definitely some issues that need to be ironed out, but there's still plenty of reasons to be positive. So I think the Giants do have what it takes to get back to the finals. It's just a question of, again, that week-to-week consistency.
Yeah, so and I completely agree. And the growth of New South Wales footy is definitely something I think will be great for both the Swans and for GWS. And the transition a little bit from last season to this season could be quite interesting to see kind of the kind of change of philosophy a little bit. For many people, the longest time GWS was the team that got all the first round draft picks. They got all the talent, but they still had
Right.
trouble keeping them there, even as much success as the team has had. So let's not go too depth into theirs. I got to ask, who is your favorite player on the club right now?
Oh, I've got to say, he gets injured all the time, but I still love Callan Ward. I mean, the guy is just an incredibly unselfish player. Very, very low key, very humble. Interestingly enough, he grew up in the western suburbs in Williamstown,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually played for Spotswood in the WRFL, and they're one of Caroline Springs' biggest competition or biggest rivals in the WRFL. They're historically a very, very good club, Spotswood, and it was he was, of course, Wardy. Played for the Bulldogs for the first few years of his career before becoming one of the inaugural Giants. Again, he's had a really bad run of luck with injuries lately, but he's an absolute gun. I love watching him play.
Yeah, he's one of those that you just hope his body gets right so he can get consistent footy into him, because he's an absolutely gun player, and he's hard not to enjoy watching when he is on the park. So you kind of discussed a little bit earlier, last season was kind of one of those hit or miss years. It was a year that was kind of frustrating a little bit, because this is a team that's very talented, a team that has a
Right.
lot of skill, but they just could not put it together at the end, and they missed the finals. And so kind of, I mean, were you disappointed in how the season kind of turned out, or are you kind of understanding because this team is kind of in a change slowly to maybe like a new direction?
I mean, I was disappointed. I figured that, like, after the loss to Richmond, there were inevitably going to be some kind of psychological effects of that, even though, of course, coaches and players are kind of trained to say, oh, it's a new week every week, it's a new opponent every week. We don't worry about the past. But at the same time, like, suffering such a bad loss like that on such a big stage definitely does have an effect. And I don't think, any team is immune from that. Like, I mean, everyone talks about how Collingwood hasn't been the same since losing to West Coast so dramatically a few years ago in the Granny. And I think that you do control that as much as you can. And I don't think it saps player confidence from week to week. I don't. But at the same time, like, again, with this past season, with the COVID-related challenges, that definitely played a factor. It was still disappointing nonetheless to not even make finals, even though they were in the race until the last couple of weeks. But again, I think there's definitely a chance to bounce back, and hopefully there's not too many challenges in the off season. I actually saw just yesterday in the news that there was like a little mini COVID outbreak, or I think they called it like a cluster of cases in like the Western Sydney area. So like the
Mhm.
Giants had to send players home, pause training for a couple of days. Hopefully that's there aren't any major issues from there. But yeah, I've been, based on what I've been seeing, the preseason has been going really positively. Obviously, in the AFL, like, depending on your age and whether you're in the leadership group or not, or whatever, like, certain players have to report back at certain dates,
Mhm.
and obviously everyone gets a couple of weeks off for Christmas and New Year's. So I think there's a lot of potential. The draft went. I haven't really looked super intensely at like the young draft picks that we just got, but the recent history is obviously strong there.
Mhm.
And as for replacing Cameron, again, we've got some good guys like Riccardi, Himmelberg, some great small forward options up there as well. Zach Williams is a guy, he had a lot of intangibles Great speed, great toughness. Another guy who had some pretty lengthy injury issues, but was definitely a really handy guy to have. Back pocket, halfback flank type of guy. I think he's going to do great at Carleton. Obviously, I wish him the best. I think we've got some really some good young talent behind him who are definitely going to make an impact. Again, I think Nick Haynes is, I think he's in all Australian form pretty much every year at this point. Obviously, can't say enough about guys like Phil Davis. Heath Shaw, obviously, it was disappointing that we weren't able to hang on to him. I know a lot of people were upset that, he was like an actual cut or an actual delisting instead of being allowed to retire on his own terms. Yeah, that was a little disappointing to see. I assume it was just salary cap issues and things like that. But at the same time, you hate to see a bloke who's given so much of himself to a club to kind of not be allowed to. And to be fair, he hasn't officially retired yet, I don't think. But just to not really be able to do it on his own terms is a bit disappointing. But I do understand that footy's a business just as much as any other sport's a business.
Yeah, and I think that one did hurt because I think he still had a little bit left in the tank. But so I gotta ask, you've kind of already discussed a little bit of the off season, and I like hearing this because not everybody kind of dives into it. The Jeremy Cameron trade, in your personal opinion, do you think GWS came out the winner, or do you think or do you think Geelong really got the best of the trade in your personal opinion?
I mean, you could never really tell with these types of things until the season actually begins. I think Cameron, he's going to do great. Obviously, he's from suburban Geelong originally, and I know he and the Mizes, had kind of always considered going back. I was really hoping that we would be able to get Brandon Parfit and maybe a couple other Geelong boys in exchange. And that didn't happen. Of course, the trade took like a month to happen. So it was a little unfortunate that we couldn't wind up landing someone big in exchange. Of course, we did get Jesse Hogan from Frio. He's kind of the X factor or the wild card, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, he's a very, very gifted guy. He's had a lot of well-documented challenges, with mental health struggles, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when he's on, he's on. He's got the ability to do some serious damage. I really hope he winds up being a big success story for us. I have a feeling he could, but that is a bit of a risky gamble. I was pretty excited about Braden Pruce. Of course, Shane Mumford, he's getting up there in years, but he said he's going to play on one more time. He's done a really great job since he's come back. Sam Jacobs, he was a former Crow that we had gotten heading into last season. He was fine, not great, not terrible. But at the same time, I can see why they wanted to add another free agent ruckman. And Pruce was kind of in an unlucky situation because he was with the Kangaroos. He did really well kind of tag teaming with Todd Goldstein down there. And then they trade him to Melbourne, where it's just like, oh, yeah, you're behind Max Gawn, who's arguably the best ruckman in the game right now, and I'm pretty sure he's the highest paid, too. So, he did fill in. I think Gawn missed a couple of games this past season. And Bruce, he did pretty well. Obviously, Melbourne's engine room is so good that, you kind of have to be terrible not to make an impact in the ruck over there. But no, bringing him over to the Giants, I think, is really good. It's one of those underrated free agent moves that might really work out well because, a few years ago, we had Matty DeBoer. DeBoer was just an afterthought at Fremantle, and he moves over to the Giants, and he becomes one of the best taggers in the game. And I know that, not every coach wants to have the tagging role, but Leon Cameron does, and DeBoer does a phenomenal job. I have a feeling that we could, unearth some gems in terms of just getting guys who, again, might just be salary cap casualties, other clubs, and kind of repackaging them to fit the GWS game plan. So, I mean, again, Hogan, jury's still out on him. Again, I'm crossing my fingers, hoping he can make a serious impact. And I think the important thing for him is, like, we're not asking him to be another Jedi. We just want him to play his role, be consistent, stay healthy. That's all he needs to do. And again, he's had a few down years, but he's shown so much talent in the past that I think he'll be able to take advantage of another chance with GWS.
Yeah, I agree. And the biggest thing in a name that you might want to look up, I think it was your first pick that you got in the Jeremy Cameron day, is Tanner Bruen. He was your first pick. A
Yeah.
really, really highly rated midfielder that I think might kind of make up for the fact that you didn't get Parfit or the Geelong guys that you were looking at. He might actually be kind of a hidden gem. So if you get a chance, check out his highlight tapes. He's definitely worth it. Definitely a gun midfielder that I think could definitely have quite a nice career in GWS. So transferring from that, I'm a huge proponent of the women's game. So I got to ask, as a GWS fan, GWS has their own women's team. Do you kind of keep an eye on the AFLW and on your Giants women's team? And kind of what are your thoughts on this season coming up?
I honestly don't follow AFL women's as much, just because, like, I think I watched a few, not AFLW games, although in person. I saw some BFLW when I was in Australia last year, and actually got to hang out with Danny Marshall a bit. At the time, I lived in Footscray, so I was right down the street from the doggies. And yeah, I went down to Whitten Oval. I saw her play a few times. Of course, this was before she got promoted to the AFLW list, so that was great. But I haven't really followed GWS women's as much as I'd like, just because, like, I don't know. I enjoy watching AFL women's on TV, but I just don't really feel as attached to it as I'd like. I definitely, it's almost counterintuitive. Like, I feel more connected to, like, USAFL women's, watching girls I know play than it is to kind of watch it professionally, even if that doesn't make that much sense. I mean, obviously the AFLW's grown significantly. It's been good to see, even if you don't appreciate it as much as the men's, which, hey, that's everyone's prerogative. But it's great for the game overall. It is, and I think it's great to have that appeal, because women's footy is still young, even in Australia, it's young, and I think it's good to have those star players that are able to have that success, and they're really setting the tone and kind of carrying the torch for crossover athletes, because so many of them are former netballers or former basketballers or soccer players, or it's really good to see that. And of course, in the off season, there was the terrible tragedy, Jacinda Barkley. Like, that was really, really terrible to see. And, obviously she's going to be in everyone's heart as the AFL and the AFLW season starts at GWS, because she was a huge part of the fabric of the footy club. And again, another crossover athlete herself. She had played in the Legends Gridiron League here in America. She had played baseball with the Australian national team, won a few medals with them. And just gone too soon, obviously. And but I do think AFL women's, especially with AFL women's is new, GWS is a new club. I think, again, there's a lot of exciting stuff happening with that. And again, I don't watch AFL women's a ton, but I do support what they're doing, and I think obviously they scrapped the conference system for this year, thank God. But because everyone hated that. But no, it's good, and I think there's going to be a lot of positive things heading forward for women's footy.
Yeah, I agree. And the growth will come with more people playing. I mean, if there for the longest time, they'd play Osball until 12 and then they couldn't play anymore. So now the fact that you're going to get more and more girls that have been able to play it from the younger ages and they didn't have to stop at 12 years old will only make the talent pool bigger. And then once you get all the clubs in, because there's still 4 clubs that still don't have their license for the AFLW too. So I think it's coming. I understand sometimes it takes a little bit to get used to it because it is so different than the men's game. And I kind of understand it. The women's game here in the States is almost a little bit more known because we've seen it much more. It's been around so much more. So I'm definitely looking forward to the growth of that. So one of my favorite questions to kind of end these episodes is, what is your favorite game you've ever seen? Whether it's a GWS game or not, it's that's up to you. What is your favorite game you've ever seen of footy?
Hmm. Does it have to be in person or
Nope.
on TV?
That's your call on that one. Whether you seen it live or you saw it on the TV, it's up to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it. I think I'm strictly thinking in terms of like finals or prelims or grand finals here. I
Mm-hmm.
think, again, even though I didn't really have a dog in either fight, you'd have to put the West Coast Collingwood grand final up there.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you want to talk historically, um, well, historically, since I've been alive, you could certainly do worse than any of Hawthorne's three-peats or Brisbane's. Those games, just watching them from the archives, like just, I mean, people will say, oh, even in the early 2000s, like with Brisbane, the game was much tougher. It was more violent.
Mm-hmm.
There were more things happening on screen. I mean, to each his own, and I'm not necessarily going to disagree with that. But just seeing those legends in action, Voss, Simon Black, all those guys for Brisbane who were just absolutely electric. And knock on wood, but we're probably never going to see that again. We're probably
Mm-hmm.
never going to see a three-peat of a non-Victorian team ever again. Maybe 30 years down the track, but I don't know. But again, just going back through any of those old highlights, and 90s footy too. That's kind of the gold standard for a lot of people. The game was just so it felt even bigger than it is now,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not just because of the crowd sizes or because of the media coverage, but like there were so many larger than life figures. Like, and I know I'm getting a little off topic. Like, I really can't pick a single game, but
Mm-hmm.
you just look at any major final from the 90s or the early 2000s, and like the passion oozes off the screen in just this tangible way. Like, again, you have these larger than life personalities. You've got, you know, so many superstars who, that's their moment, and just they're just dominating. Like, I know everyone uh, thinks of Nathan Buckley as just the coach now, but seeing his highlights from his era, like, good lord, that guy was absolutely electric with the footy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, or even guys like Ben Cousins. People remember him for his off-field indiscretions, but my goodness,
Mm-hmm.
they called him the Prince of Perth for a reason. I think just in general, I think people complain a lot these days because there's not enough individuality in footy. I don't know if I buy that, but at the same time, again, you look at those old games, those old highlight reels of those legendary players, and there was something a bit more that they had. Again, the force of personality and the charisma that all these great players, Matty Lloyd, Gary Ablett Sr., uh, Dustin Fletcher, all the Gavin Wanganeen, all these guys, Michael O'Loughlin, all Barry Hall, all these guys who were just absolute titans of the game. And I think nowadays, you hear, there are great personalities in today's game as well, but at the same time, I think that there's more of a intensity to the older days of footy, but also kind of this classic Aussie cheekiness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's something where everyone's playing for the passion of the game, but they're also having fun with it. So I think, again, I know it's getting a little off topic here, but I think that's something that's important to think about. You know, we can always mention the iconic games and who put their hand up and stepped up when their team needed it most. But I think footy is all about the characters, all about the people and the personalities that make the game so great. Because that's something that I think everyone wants, no matter what sport it is. People don't want robots. They want people who are really passionate and charismatic about their choice of living. And I think footy is unique in that regard because, again, you've got that Australian cheekiness to it. You've got that schoolboy atmosphere. But at the same time, it's just, this is something that so many people take deadly seriously. And, you know, they get more people on average than Major League Baseball gets over here. So, yeah, it's just fun to analyze stuff like that because, you know, there are so many elements to footy that make it such a brilliant game.
Yeah, and it's so sometimes it's so hard, especially if you enjoy the history of the game and some of the old ones. Wayne Carey's another one that when you watched him play, the King is so hard not to just enjoy his greatness too. So Rick, this has been an absolutely awesome conversation. An incredible footy mind you have on yourself, sir. It's always great to find somebody that's actually played down in Australia too. It's not something I've actually had in any of the previous interviews. So it's been awesome. I want to thank you again for your time. Do you have any connections on social media, podcasts, kind of anything about like if any other fellow GWS fans want to reach out and contact you or start following you?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the kind words. Firstly, again, I'm glad that we could finally get this done. I know it's it's a bit of a challenge with our schedules trying to coordinate a good time to do this. But again, thanks for having me on. I've been able to do a handful of podcast interviews since I got back from Australia, which is always fun. I did Cobra Cast recently with Ricky and Rick down in Melbourne. That was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
As for social media, I am on Instagram. It's Shabonz616. That's SHABBONZ 616. I'm on Facebook as well. Don't really get on Twitter much these days, but yeah, I appreciate the shout out. And again, like any other Giants fans out there who might be tuning in, I'm excited for the season. Here's hoping to a big rebound. And yeah, like I said, it's been a real pleasure being on here, and I'm really glad that we could finally do this.
I did too. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's always fun to be on the opposite side, considering you helped interview me for your Outside 50 podcast. So it was kind of fun to
Yeah,
kind of be
that
on
was
the
really
other side too. And I'm hoping
exactly
that
that
gets
was
back
really fun.
going up too. I know I talked to Tara a little bit, and I'm hoping you guys can get back to that because that was a really good podcast. I really appreciated what you guys did there, and it was so much fun to chat with you guys. In fact, that was the first podcast I got to do for the
Yeah,
Roosters, so that was amazing.
yeah, it was fun. Like we kind of had to put it on hold due to a variety of factors.
Mm-hmm.
Never say never. We might bring it back at some point, but it was kind of Kraz's idea to begin with. And he's kind of, we're focusing on other projects right now. He's enlisted my help with the Footy 5000 project, which you've probably heard about already. Footy5000.com. We're trying to emphasize more of a grassroots type of approach. What the US AFL does is phenomenal, but this is independent of that, and we're kind of trying to reach the game of footy into places that don't have footy yet, and that might include starting new clubs from scratch. That might include just having a casual kick and a beer afterward, wherever you are. And I think that's a project that really has legs right now. We're definitely doing our best to kind of develop a strategy to grow the game wherever you are, because as long as you have a footy and as long as you have someone to kick to, I mean, that's good enough for most of us. So yeah, but no, again, Donnie, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. We're going to look forward to seeing the finished product on YouTube. And yeah, all the best.
No problem, Rick. It's been a pleasure, sir. You have a nice night. And fourth and long fans, this is your AFL correspondent, Donnie Hess, signing off.